Very good evening, all. Welcome to the Unitarian Society of New Haven. My name is Jesse Greist. I'm the coordinator of congregational life here, and it is such a great pleasure to invite so many familiar faces and some folks that I haven't ever seen before. Welcome to this space. I am used to talking from this pulpit at 10:30 on a Sunday, and unaccustomed to having the sunset be a natural spotlight right here, so my apologies, Jason, for that. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come spend a little time with us this evening. I wanted to go over a couple of building notes with you all before our minister, Reverend Stephen Kendrick, does the official introduction to tonight's talk. So a couple of, like I say, nuts and bolts about this place. This sanctuary holds up to 350 people. If anyone at any point needs to find yourself in another situation, we have a TV that's wired for sound in our social hall through those double doors back that way, just up this aisle here. If you go into that, you can continue to see the talk, and there are seats out there, sound and video out there, if for any reason you need to, take a moment outside of this sanctuary. We have emergency exits that are to my left and to my right here. They are illuminated. I always kind of want to go like that. There are also emergency exits back by where the big camera is making the recording tonight. So if you go up this aisle here and out to your left, you'll get out of our building. And then also there is an emergency exit where you came in. A couple of other things. Bathrooms are located, if you go across our lobby, out those doors there, if you go across the lobby and down the stairs and to the right past the elevator, you will find a male-identified restroom. Up the stairs and to the right past the restroom, you'll find a female-identified restroom. And up the stairs and down the hall to your left, you'll find a gender-neutral restroom. Let's see, what else did I want to say? This beautiful sanctuary has been our spiritual home here at Unitarian Society of New Haven for about 23 years, and one of the ways we have kept it that way is by asking people to not have any food or drink just in this room. If you have something, if you get low blood sugar or anything like that, again, you can go out those double doors at the back and continue to see the talk and hear the talk if you need to eat something or have a little drink or something like that. We are going to...
And through the double doors, of course, will be where the book signing will be.
And that's my next announcement, which is after this, we are inviting Professor Stanley to stay afterwards for a book signing. We have about 60 copies of the book here, and the ability to order more if we run out. And so at the end of our time tonight, we will exit through those double doors. There will be some water out there, and also the book signing. And so that'll be, through those double doors and to the right, you'll see, follow the line and the crowd, and please don't stampede each other for the copies of the book. And last thing, there will be a question and answer time. We're going to ask people when it's time to give your questions. We have a microphone set up right here. We're going to ask that people come to the middle aisle and come down and form a line to do your questions. And when you're done after your question, come forward and use these two rows to go back to your seat. And we'll take the questions, as many as we can. If anybody has mobility issues and would like to ask a question, we do have a microphone that can be brought to you. So just raise your hand and make eye contact with me when it's that time, and we'll get you a microphone. But for most of the folks, we ask that you come make a line right here. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce Reverend Stephen Kendrick, who had this brainchild to start an author series, an evening author series here. And we're very pleased. By the way, this is our inaugural event. So this is the first time we're having... So Stephen, come on up.
Thank you.
Good evening. And as Jesse has indicated, welcome to each and every one of you to make time out of our busy lives to come together for the matters that most concern us and for the common life we share. When we decided we wanted to start this author's series of talks, we understood that this is a uniquely interesting area of the country to draw on. And so, in years to come, we want to reach out to poets and artists and to journalists, to novelists, to essayists, to academics, to anyone who can help clarify the past, illumine and point forth a hopeful path to the future, and most importantly, for good and for ill, to bring life and perspective to the situations in which we find ourselves in the present. Many people come into this beautiful sanctuary over the years for musical events. Musicians and people that love music are well acquainted with this place, and we decided that we wanted to add something new to that cultural lodestone, something that can bring you into this life that we share. And quite frankly, we could think of no better first author in this series than Professor Jason Stanley. In his work, in his 7 books, yes, he has forged a path. As Paul Frank's chair of the Yale Department of Philosophy calls Jason a pioneer in analytic philosophy, and I suspect you could very quickly leave us in the dust. But more importantly, as an important public intellectual, because of your work in propaganda, fascism, and in your newest book that you'll be presenting tonight, Erasing History. Congressman Jamie Raskin praises Erasing History, saying that it leaves us with the sense that those who fight for the past can save the future. Professor Stanley has been studying for over a decade authoritarian regimes' ability to use propaganda and the manipulation of a culture's historical memory. And he writes that the past is the front line in the struggle for a future free of fascism. He will be leaving Yale next fall to teach at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, a topic that I will leave entirely to him. And so I only add our considerable thanks to you to make time in your very, very busy schedule and in the upkeep of your normal life that you have made this time to be with us tonight. Join me in welcoming Professor Jason Stanley.
First of all, I never would have missed this, so this would be my top priority, speaking in front of Unitarians who have long been really the religious representatives for peace and justice in this country, Quakers and but Nixon wasn't a Unitarian. So it's really a tremendous honor. And what I'm going to do is not really speak in detail about the book. The book is the stage that sets my comments tonight. What I want to discuss is, what has happened today, what has happened yesterday, using the framework that I laid out for what I knew was going to happen, which is what we face today. So Linda McMahon, in her piece, I think it's called something like the final mission of the Department of Education, said, we're going to battle the toxic ideology that the United States was based on slavery. I don't remember exactly the words she used. Basically she said, we're going to battle the toxic ideology of actual history, because the United States was, in fact, birthed in indigenous genocide and slavery. Those are not negative things to say about the United States, they're facts. And so the final mission of the Department of Education is to erase factuality. Indeed, the final mission of the Department of Education, according to McMahon, is to instill patriotic education, that the United States is the greatest democracy, the greatest country in human history, an exceptional country, a beacon of democracy for the world. And they're going to the idea is to install this at our schools and universities. They're going to install the ideology that the United States could never fall to fascism at the very same time at which it is falling. In general, the things they are targeting are exactly the things that we need in order to understand what they're doing. Gender studies. You might have noticed some patriarchy out there. Black studies, you might have noticed some racism, anti-black racism out there. So you can know what's being done to the country by what they're saying can't be taught. Now, when we think about racism and patriarchy, the propaganda against, say, critical race theory and DEI tells us that claims that that critical race theory divides the world into oppressor and oppressed. Indeed, the claim is that any talk of racism divides the world into oppressor and oppressed. Nothing could be further from the truth for a theory of racism. Du Bois, in Black Reconstruction, his 1935 book, talks about racism in a very different way. Du Bois, whose family comes from New Haven before they moved to Great Barrington, and whose grandparents are buried in the Grove Street Cemetery, wrote Black Reconstruction as an account of the end of Second Reconstruction. And we are facing now a time where, like in that time, we may face decades and decades before we can restore a path to multiracial democracy. So what did Du Bois say in that book about the end of Reconstruction, the era where Black Americans in the South were allowed to vote? I'm old enough to remember, well, I'm 40, but I've been 40 for a very long time. My mother is 36, though, so it's awkward. But I'm old enough to remember the first Black congressman from the South since Reconstruction. Remember that? When people would, that was, since Reconstruction. So 110, 120 years of recovery from that moment. And that's what I suspect we face here, if we have such a time. Or that's what I worry we face here. So what does Du Bois say about racism in that iconic work? He says that poor whites and poor blacks were coming together to form a labor movement. Racism was used by the northern industrialists who saw the upcoming labor movement and the southern planter class to split poor whites and poor blacks apart. Similarly, patriarchy. We are seeing patriarchy and racism, as Ida B. Wells emphasized, cannot clearly be distinguished. Patriarchy, too, is a method to split us apart. In both cases, there are ways of telling men, in the one case, poor whites, in another case, that their real allegiance is to wealthy people who share an identity with them, and not to their class interests, not to their material interests. That's the function of racism and patriarchy. So do racism and patriarchy split the world into oppressor and oppressed based on race or gender? No. Racism and patriarchy oppresses men, that's its point, and racism oppresses whites, That's its point, one of its points, central points. These are methods of power. They're methods of power to tear us apart so we vote against our material interests. So what we're seeing today, as we see the development of a multiracial far right, is we are seeing, as my colleague Daniel Hosang discusses at length, is we're seeing, I believe, patriarchy wielded as a powerful weapon against democracy. There's another concept that is crucial for understanding the current moment, and that's René Girard's concept of the scapegoat. René Girard, when you're wondering how you construct the multiracial far right. René Girard, Peter Thiel's favorite theorist, says that a political community is created by the selection of an innocent scapegoat. A political community is a diverse group of people who you unify in hatred against a scapegoat. So how do you get white supremacists, Black Americans, Latino Americans, religious Muslims to align together? You pick a scapegoat that enough of these groups hate collectively that they don't look to their left and look to their right and see who's joining them in this hatred. And that is why across the world, LGBTQ citizens are a scapegoat. And then the concept of LGBTQ, like the concept of people of color, needs to be unpacked. Because in this moment, it really isn't the L and the G and the B that are being targeted, it's the T that's being targeted. And why is the T being targeted? Because it's such a small group of people. And the smaller your scapegoat group is, the more effective your political coalition is. So now what we see across the world now, so I want to address another point that you might be hearing from your friends and neighbors, and that's that the authoritarianism we now see is a reaction to a backlash reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, to trans acceptance, and other movements for other democratic movements for equality. So the idea is like, you deserve it. You deserve it because you back these movements for equality. What did you expect? That's the fault. Oh, sure, it's too much of a backlash. But you're actually at fault. You Unitarians who preach equality, you're why we have fascism now. I'm sure many of you have heard this. I certainly have. But that line of argument fails in multiple ways. First of all, this is a global movement against democracy. Vladimir Putin, on the eve of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, gave a speech where he said that Russia has to invade Ukraine to stop the parent one, parent two ideology that Ukraine and the West are spreading to destroy civilization. So unless you're prepared to say that the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was a backlash to the existence of trans women in Ukraine, then I don't think you're entitled to say that what happened here is a backlash to local conditions here. It is a global movement, and there are global strategies. Which scapegoats are employed depends on the country. In Western Europe, the scapegoats are immigrants. It's xenophobia and Muslims. And so that's why you find the structure of authoritarianism in Western Europe. That's why you find women fascist leaders, because they're trying to make the point. They're feminism washing, Muslim bigotry, anti-Muslim bigotry. So there are different structures depending on where you find yourself and the history of those places. Now, what is our history? Well, Elizabeth Hinton, my colleague at Yale, has a book called America on Fire. And in this book, she documents, chapter 3, I believe, is called The Cycle. She documents, and really this is, I think, the point of the book. She looks at small cities like Cairo, Illinois, and New Haven. And she shows that there's what she calls a cycle. And what that cycle is, I guess it's best described by an undergraduate who came to me in, I believe, 2016 and said, Professor Stanley, I've lived in America. I'm from America. I've lived here my whole life. And it's always like police officer beats up a black person, then there's a big protest movement, then everyone says they'll do something about it, and then like everyone is like, oh, then some politician comes and said they're coddling the criminals, and things go back to where they were, but maybe worse. That's what Elizabeth Hinton calls the cycle. And America on Fire shows, and she focuses not on LA and Rodney King, not on Michael Brown and Ferguson, but on small city after small city where you find the same cycle. Unknown cases to the nation, but in city after city you find these cycles from the 1960s on. A country is structured by the pattern of its history, and our pattern is this cycle of black protests for freedom, or revolutions, as Hinton calls them, and white backlash. That is our country. It's not the same as other countries. It's not the same as Russia. It's not the same as Poland. It's not the same as Germany. But our country is that way. And so when someone comes to you and says, oh, this is a backlash and it's your fault, point out to them, no, this is America asserting itself. This is America in its endless cycle. And one day, we must break that cycle, but we're going through it again. It has nothing to do with, the fault of the people pushing for equality. It has to do with something that's just all too familiar. Now, what the Trump administration is doing, the Trump regime, is they're drawing on this historical memory, as any authoritarian regime draws on historical memory. So Russia draws on historical memory of Stalin. Putin is drawing on that. Oh, look, we were glorious then. So they're drawing on historical memory in the attack on universities. How so? Well, in the United States, Henry Ford wrote a book called The International Jew, about how Jews supposedly control the institutions and everything. So the administration, the regime, is leaning into that anti-Semitic stereotype. They're saying, the Jews control the institutions, so we're going to destroy the universities and tell you it's because of the Jews. So, just like they embrace Mayor Adams in New York, who, one might say is corrupt. I'm being recorded, so I won't say that. But I've heard it said. But so why are they embracing Mayor Adams? They're embracing Mayor Adams because the idea is that black politicians are corrupt. This is a stereotype from the American past that also was central to the end of Reconstruction. The idea was that the new black politicians, elected black politicians, the state legislators in South Carolina were corrupt. So this regime is using these stereotypes, of course with the help of certain people. But if you looked at the anti-war protests on our campus and on other campuses, you'll see that one of the largest identity groups were Jewish students and faculty. So it took months for the media to recognize that. It took months for the New York Times to add that little phrase, and some Jews. Even though the tent, Jews for Ceasefire at Yale, was as large as any other tent, or larger. So right now, when Jews chain themselves, and young progressive Jews chain themselves to Columbia's gates to be arrested, to free Muhammad Khalil. You know, the media is forced to recognize these are young Jews. And yet at the same time, they're saying, the media often the media is complicit. The media, don't be fooled, has been the engine behind the attack on the universities. They've been the one pushing the narrative that Marxists run Yale University. I'm sure, like other people in New Haven, you might be suspicious of that claim. And this narrative that universities are somehow controlled by Marxists and cultural Marxists, it's so powerful when pushed by the New York Times and other media that, you know, the New York Times has published, I don't know, I can't even count. I once tried to count, and I stopped at like a few dozen, concern trolling about leftists on campus. Op-ed after op-ed after op-ed about leftists on campus. No mention ever of the Buckley Society. Talking about Yale Law School, the power of the Federalist Society at Yale Law School. No mention of campus reform, the college fix, the right-wing newspapers that target professors in terrifying ways, bringing death threat after death threat onto them for saying progressive things. No mention. The New York Times has nothing to say about that. All they have to say is that supposedly the Buckley Society, the conservatives on campus, you know, the Federalist Society, are the real victims of Yale University. So this is what our entire, not the entire media, but I'm not aware of a single New York Times op-ed that talks about the targeting of progressive students and professors on campus. So this is the media environment we've been in. Panic about leftists, pushed by a media that doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that they are targets too. That there's no way for the New York Times to escape. They can set up the other democratic institutions and say, no, they're leftists, not us, look. They can do that all they want, but it's not going to help them because they're targets too. So the administration is using anti-Semitism in multiple ways. They're leaning into anti-Semitic stereotypes, knowing that it's setting us up. I'm Jewish, in case that isn't clear. A lot of people don't know. I'm usually introduced as Joshua Stanley for some reason. And in every article about me going to Toronto, it says I'm fleeing. And in every article about Tim Snyder, it says he's departing. Neither of us is fleeing. So they're leaning. If you're asking yourself now, why did they start with Columbia? So they started with Columbia University, and I decided to leave the United States that evening. I had this offer from the University of Toronto. I didn't know what I was going to do, but as soon as I saw Columbia capitulate in this humiliating way, and then they drove, and as soon as Katrina Armstrong, the president, capitulated and gave this sort of hostage statement, they pushed her out the next week. And then she was supposed to go back to the medical school. Now she's on indefinite leave from the medical school. So, you know, as anyone knows who's read or experienced domestic abuse, you do not treat a domestic abuse, you not try to placate a domestic abuser. That just increases the abuse. Look at Columbia. They're cycling through university presidents every few months. This has never happened before. It has never happened that the federal government has just forced one of our major universities to fire its president over and over. The new president, who's a BA and was on the board, not an academic, she's already in trouble because of some, they're trying to set a record for a number of presidents in a year. Now, Colombia was the beginning. They hit Colombia with $400 million. That seemed like a lot at the time. It doesn't seem like a lot after Harvard, $9 billion, Cornell, $1 billion, Northwestern, $790 million. All will go to finance the tax cuts for the oligarchs and the billionaires, of course. It will disappear. It won't go to do anything other than, put a tiny little number next to the trillions that we're giving up to billionaires. So why $400 million and why Colombia? $400 million, the New York Times pointed out, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Trump had a business deal or something that he wanted $400 million from Colombia from. And then they wouldn't pay. So I'm sure it's a coincidence. I'm on camera. So this is just, it's now Colombia. Secondly, why Colombia? Colombia is in New York. New York, lots of Jews. Sorry, you can laugh uncomfortably, but I'm a New Yorker. It's one of the places where we live, where we love. New York, it's the second largest Jewish population of any city in the world. And Columbia University has the largest Jewish student population of any university, 22%. Of any Ivy League university. So, not any. Yeshiva, I'm sure, can beat that 22%. So they're targeting, so the historian Tim Snyder recently said in his Substack, he said, as a historian I can report, I know of no other case where universities and free speech were attacked to protect Jewish people. And finally, of course, it's hiding the crimes Israel is perpetrating in Gaza. It's making it seem that the real victims of what's happening in Gaza, the horrors in Gaza, are people like me, Jewish faculty on campus. So it performs this function. Suddenly, all of the conversation is about anti-Semitism. The Columbia president was fired, the Columbia president was hauled in front of a congressional subcommittee a few days ago, and she was excoriated for not being able to list all incidents of anti-Semitism in the Columbia campus. Maybe there weren't as many as were claimed. So now, why did the media erase the presence of Jewish students from campuses, from the encampments, when progressive Jewish students are almost in all post-war movements for social justice are central participants, Jewish Americans? Why did they do that? Because they're saying left-wing Jews aren't Jews. Only right-wing Jews are Jews. So, and then, Jewish people disagree with each other a lot. I'm sure many of you know they go to people discover an island, and there's a stranded Jewish person there, and he's built two structures on different sides of the island. They said, what are these? And he said, well, this is the synagogue I'd go to, and that's the synagogue I would never step foot in. But when Christian nationalists are telling you who the real Jews are, that's when you know you're facing anti-Semitism. And then, of course, we have the anti-blackness of the moment. So I said that LGBTQ was not a helpful phrase right now, because it hides the true target. People of color is another not helpful phrase. The people that are being targeted, I've been looking to see who they're calling a DEI hire. Now, it's women, but it's primarily black people. It's not, I have yet to find a South Asian person who they call a DEI hire. I recently had an argument with someone who said, well, Kamala Harris is South Asian. Okay. But people of color is doing problematic work in a country that is constantly creating new white people. So the attack on DEI is nothing other than an attack on black people in positions of power. And what it does is that it makes black people, like my two sons, if they succeed and become successful, they're going to be called DEI hires. And so it's an attempt to take people, to have power look like it does in the Trump regime. And so those faces. Sorry, I could go on for a long time.
Why
When I wrap
for
up.
about 10 more minutes?
Okay. I'm going to try to shift to hope soon. But I think it's very important to understand something that the concerned liberals don't seem to get, and the New York Times doesn't seem to get for the most part, which is that when you're in a war, appeasement is surrender. And so if you do not know you're in a war, you're going to lose. So the first part is knowing that you're in a war. The goal of the machine behind Trump, and it's not just Trump, it's the machine behind Trump, is to take over, is to destroy, and then take over all the institutions. This process the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, which, a year ago when I said it in the media, people were like, oh, what's that? Now I think most people know what that is. That was the process the Nazis used, the Nazis called that would, to replace all federal workers, all teachers by party loyalists. They vilified them as Marxists and communists, and then they replaced them by loyalists. I'm teaching a course on a sort of one of those recherche, abstract, irrelevant topics with my colleague Robin Dembroff, fascism and patriarchy. And we just taught Wilhelm Reich's The Mass Psychology of Fascism, which was published in 1936. And he talked about, I mean, I'd forgotten this, he talked about the Nazi attack in the elections on federal workers. And he said, so Reich is he's looking at different categories of people who voted for the Nazis but shouldn't have. And he's asking, why did they vote for the Nazis? And he comes to industrial workers. Well, really, he's talking about everybody. So he's talking about some people who were the base, but he comes to industrial workers. And industrial workers shouldn't have voted for the Nazis because they're urban industrial workers unionized. And the Nazis hated trade unions. Trade unions were supposed to be Marxist, Jewish run. Nazis give us a lot of credit. Feminism, liberalism, everything. So why did industrial workers vote for the Nazis? And what Reich says is that the Nazis campaigned against the federal workers by saying they think they're better than you. And he says that federal workers made about the same amount of money as industrial workers, because Germany's unions, remember, were strong and are strong again today. But they had slightly higher social class. You could bring a federal worker back to your home as your part and introduce them to your parents. But a factory worker was trickier. They had less social status than a federal worker. And then they had more precarious status. A federal worker couldn't be fired. So they used this resentment, the elevated social status of a federal worker, the sort of lifetime tenure of a federal worker, to foment hatred of federal workers. And then they said the federal workers are living off your taxes. You know, the federal workers are parasites. So this process of Gleichschaltung, of replacement, vilification and then replacement, that's a process we're familiar with from the past. First you vilify, and then you replace. Now, what our democratic institutions are doing is not recognizing this. Even they're not understanding, like when I had been talking to administrations in different places, what I found is first ridicule of me, like ridicule. No, you're an alarmist, you're just like, no, they're going to be our friends, they have legitimate objections, and they're totally, all this is normal, and you're just a hysterical leftist, and, don't worry, we talk to experts. That's literally what I was told. We talk to experts. There's no war against universities. This, I don't think they say anymore. But, no, you're a hysterical leftist, and the experts tell us people are really worried about the woke and the Marxists. And even this panic that the media fomented and the far right took advantage of, it was so pervasive. I would say most faculty members I knew were subject to it. I'd say to them, but the majority of your colleagues are also kind of anti-woke white dudes. So what's going on? Why do you think the university is run by, cultural Marxists? And so it was the same in every workplace, right? This panic about, it's true that the Yale Philosophy Department hired its first black tenured professor this year, and that is panic, because so much changed so quickly. They were already in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, we didn't take chances. But this kind of panic was so widespread. It took our scientists by incredible surprise, because I think a lot of them were apolitical, and they're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen to you women and gender studies people, but we're good. But, if I were to rob a bank, I wouldn't rob the gender studies bank. So it's the institutions they're targeting. And they're targeting them not to protect Jewish students and faculty, because Jewish students and faculty at Columbia are deeply and grievously harmed by the loss of so much federal funds. Jewish students and faculty at Columbia are deeply and grievously harmed by the atmosphere of fear among the faculty. All of us in universities are deeply and grievously harmed by the fact that our non-American citizen colleagues can never speak about politics again, even the ones in political science departments. So we are in a situation in the United States where the centrist liberals, Martin Luther King's white moderates, are placing us in existential peril with their nonsense, with their idea that it's all about talking, we just have to be reasonable, because that is actually explicitly what the attackers are taking advantage of, knowledgably. They know that if they get the concern trolling rolling, they get to win. So we have to recognize the situation we're in before it's too late. We have to recognize that it's not a discussion, It's a defense of our schools, of our universities, of our children, of our freedoms against this attack. And that doesn't mean that, and it's not a conservative or progressive or liberal thing, because I don't think, you saw a lot of, I don't know how many principled conservatives there are now supporting what's going on, the kind of, takeover, essentially, of what's going on, that's happening. Power takeover by one person and a machine behind him. We've never seen in this country one political party vote 100% all the time for their leader. That's communist China. That's not our history. As problematic and vexed as U.S. history has been, we have never seen one political party vote unanimously for their leader every time with no dissent whatsoever. That's authoritarianism. That's not democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you come back up? Thank you. They were standing here. So, I think you think about it. So we invite you to come forward if you have questions, and I suspect you do. And as people do come forward, I get the first question, which is earlier in the week on the National Park Service website, specifically referencing the Underground Railroad, references to slavery were scrubbed and the photograph and caption of Harriet Tubman was taken away. Then people complained and rose up, and now she's back. And when I read that, I remembered a phrase from Frederick Douglass that's actually in our hymnal. Find out what people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. So talk a little bit more about how we fight back and what that means and how we face them down. I know that they are apparently fairly shameless, but what works if shame doesn't?
Well, I think one thing, and this is what I've been trying to urge here, is that you have to address people in your community who say, oh, they have, the sort of concerned trolling liberal, the white moderate. Those are the weak point. That's the weak point, is the white moderate who's like, no, they just want to have a discussion. Like, that was literally what people were saying. I published my book, How Fascism Works, in 2018, and that was just the continual response until, yesterday. No, it's all you wild leftists on campus and wild leftist seventh grade teachers, and they just want to know, they just want to have a reasonable discussion. And I talk to people in the machine behind Trump, because I'm a white guy, so they're like, okay, you're like the slugger on the New York Yankees, and I'm the pitcher on the Boston Red Sox. That's how some of them, I have a relationship, sort of a communicative relationship with some of the people designing these attacks. And they know that. They know that they just need to get the centrist liberals on their side, and to get them to be active participants in the destruction of their own institutions. So try to get people to recognize, that's the first thing, that this is an existential fight, and no one is going to stop to save you. And, it doesn't mean you should hate people on the other who are doing this, because I have Trump supporters in my family. None of them, I don't have people in my family who are, I think the people I have in my family who are Trump supporters are sort of light Trump supporters. They didn't expect what would happen, and they thought I was an alarmist. So I think, but But I think the first thing to do, my job is like, again and again, to remind people they're in a fight. Another thing is to learn the strategies. So for example, in the southern states, I was in Tennessee in the summer, and Justin Jones, the heroic state legislator, I met him, and he asked me a couple questions. First question he asked was, do you know what the Danube Institute, what do you know about the Danube Institute? The Danube Institute is Viktor Orban's think tank, and the Tennessee state legislature had passed a resolution praising it. and then he asked the Speaker of the House, Justin Jones, Representative Jones asked the Speaker of the House, do you know who Viktor Orban is? And he said, no. And the second thing he said is, what's going on with institutional neutrality? And it turns out that when Republicans grab a supermajority, they push institutional neutrality on the universities. Now what happened when after Trump won? Suddenly, all the universities put together hand-picked faculty to decide to impose institutional neutrality. And if you don't know what the strategies are, and then even yesterday I was sitting down with some professors, and they were like, I was telling them this, it's a strategy. It's a strategy to make you shut up as they destroy you. And he's like, but what's wrong with institutional neutrality? I'm like, nothing is wrong in principle, even though they used to pick university presidents by their bold political statements, right? That's what a great president was. But, you have to divorce at this point. You're not living in an ideal world, okay? So when you're evaluating things that people propose to you, you can't evaluate them in isolation. You have to think about their strategic purpose. So if you find yourself having an argument with someone or a discussion about a policy, ask, what role does this policy play in a strategy for destroying democracy? So that's the intellectual work I do. And the work that you can do, or we all can do together, or I would do if I wasn't fleeing, is essentially do the job that you have. Because in fascism, in any authoritarian country, every institution is replaced by corrupt loyalists who then dismantle the institution and sell it for parts to other loyalists. This is what's happening in Hungary now. It's always like when you're looking at a place like Hungary, on the one hand you have the ideology, but on the other hand, like, okay, there's the attack on Central European University, but then there's the recognition that the buildings CEU has are in the most prime real estate in Budapest. And so, it would be great if Viktor Orban's buddies could have those buildings. So it's always like that. You always have to think of the corruption and think of the ideology simultaneously. So if you do your jobs in an effective way and refuse to be corrupted, if you're a teacher and you teach Black history, if you're a lawyer and you refuse to bend the knee to Trump and you just do your job, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you refuse to be replaced by a corrupt loyalist, if you refuse to act like a corrupt loyalist, you're doing what you should be doing.
Thank you. More questions, please?
Any other? Yeah, people come up to the microphone, please.
So you speak of the machine behind Trump, but isn't that machine made up a confluence of different factions, such as Peter Thiel and the idea of a technocracy, or the Christian nationalists, the Seven Mountains Mandate? Could you break that down a little bit further?
Yeah.
And where might there be some fractures?
Right. So we're all waiting for Elon Musk and Steve Bannon to break up. They've been saying they're going to break up. They've been telling us, but like every relationship, it drags on. So as long as the populace, look, we all read the various exculpatory, normalizing interviews in the New York Times of these figures. Though I would suggest the Mark Anderson interview by Ross Douthat as a great example of like, whoa, it was hard to be exculpatory of that. That's sort of really revelatory of like, what the hatred is, that Andreessen says, we don't want to be rich. We want to be regarded as like the saviors, the best people. And remember what happened? Do you remember that time when people didn't like very wealthy bankers? Do you remember that? Our students don't remember it. They don't know about it. But there was that brief time when people didn't. And then there was the fury that the wealthiest bankers had, because they were like, we're used to being admired. So I think that's going on a lot with the oligarchs, the tech oligarchs. They want to be worshipped. And the Christian nationalists, of course, want something different. But the tech oligarchs are not going to have to live under what the Christian nationalists want. And the Christian nationalists want the deconstruction of the state. Melinda Cooper discusses this in her book, Family Values, where she talks about Family Values, her book, as well as Nancy MacLean's book, Democracy in Chains, talks about exactly this, the confluence of Christian nationalism and libertarianism. Because when Margaret Thatcher is often quoted as saying, part of her, people only give part of her quote, there are no societies, there are only individuals. But in fact, the whole quote is something like, there are no societies, there are only individuals and families, or individuals and communities, or I think it's families. So what do they mean? Well, if there's no state, if there's no society, and you're LGBTQ, you're an LGBTQ citizen, well, if your family rejects you, there's no social welfare system, there's no place you can go. So there's no state, no health insurance. So you have to do what your family says. So the destruction of the state, if you're an LGBTQ child and there's only religious schools to go to, because there's no public school system, your life will be hell unless you conform. So therein lies the overlap. Both want the complete destruction of the state.
Thank you.
David Brooks, in a recent piece he just published called I Should Have Known, or something like that, engages in an enormous kind of a mea culpa about I was wrong about this, and then he says, but of course the woke universities did kind of call this down upon us.
Yeah.
Is this an example of...
David Brooks was repeatedly hired at Yale and repeatedly taught his own stuff at Yale. Like, he would repeatedly teach courses on character where you'd read David Brooks, and then he'd publish op-eds about how awful Yale is. I don't even get it. And then the liberals at Yale are like, oh, hit me again, let's get him back, and to talk about, so this has been which not to say these private, I'm a man of the people. I went to SUNY Stony Brook. I didn't go to Yale, so I got to Yale as the only way I could have, which is as a professor. But we have a lot of great students. There's a lot of, there's much more economic mobility. I love my students at Yale, I have to say. And it's a wonderful place to teach. It's, it's a great place to send your kids for undergraduate school because, the teaching is the most important thing. But still, obviously these elite institutions are implicated in American inequality, and so there's justified resentment against them. I hated these institutions in the abstract until I became part of them. So, and I'm sure many people feel this way. So but all the, to attack professors who make, like, let's see, we had, 600, 700 people apply for our 4 graduate positions this year. Of those four people who will enter our program, 2 will get jobs. Professors are among the biggest precariat of any, they're working class, they're working poor. Are they really the enemy? And then to be told by David Brooks that they're the enemy, when he's regularly given a job as a professor to teach his columns, essentially, to pick on. But this is fascism. Fascism aims at the cultural elite on behalf of the business elite. So, the elites, the coastal elites. Who are the coastal elites? Well, some person teaching, 3 courses at Rutgers, Newark, and 2 courses at Queens College, and commuting between them. Oh, that's the coastal elite, according to David Brooks.
Thank you. So my daughter got, last month, she got accepted into a graduate program at University of Madison at Wisconsin, and then last week, it was rescinded. So I've been obviously thinking about this, but I was wondering about your opinion on what is really happening with the universities. I mean, they still have the money, and it seems like it's going to be a serious knock-on effect without having graduate students in that genre and generation. So I was wondering what your opinion is on what you're thinking is going on with that.
First of all, I just am really, really sorry, and I know it was a shock for you and for your daughter. Just horrible. You spend your whole undergraduate career dreaming about, University of Wisconsin-Madison is one of the great universities of the world, and what they're doing. Harvard rescinded all its wait list, canceled all its wait lists. One of my students was waitlisted in their graduate program. So, they're seeing how far they can go. They want to take it all down. So they want to, as Trump said, I love the poorly educated.
Right.
So the fact is, now you might hear people say, well, the universities are unbalanced, they're not enough conservatives. Well, guess what? The Yale Physics Department, I'm guessing, has no Trump supporters. The Yale Math Department, do they have any Trump supporters? Maybe they do, but the vast majority of hard science professors are not Trump supporters. So, when people say to you, the universities are ideological, well, just strip away all the humanities and just leave the hard sciences, and you're just still going to get, not a lot of Trump. So what the ultimate goal is to, use universities as places to stick political supporters, corruption. So just, they're hit them until, they definitely want to destroy, like, American universities are the best in the world. They're one of the only things we do, they're maybe the only thing we do that there's no close second. And what they're trying to do is utterly destroy that. So, academia is, there's a lot of luck, like in anything, but it's also a place where the best professors will go to other places if they see that those other places have a better future. And that's not fleeing. That's just being, one of the things they're talking about is prohibiting any university who is found guilty of anti-Semitism from having any international students. What is that going to do to our university system?
So something I've been puzzling over is why there is absolutely no Republican opposition to Trump. We read that in private, such and such a Republican says this, or some group of Republicans is concerned. What does he have on them? especially the people who are not up for re-election anytime soon. Because you can say, well, he's threatening to primary, this one to primary, but the people who aren't up for re-election in 4 or 6 years seem to be equally terrified. What do you think that's about? My theory is that he has something on them, but
I mean, what does that even mean anymore, to have something on anyone? I mean, he put Matt Gaetz up for Attorney General. I mean,
well, right.
you know, Matt Gaetz' response to allegedly being at sex parties or whatever with lots of drugs, which, you know, I'm not going to judge anyone, but was, you know, I'm single.
What do you think that's about in a way that you were?
Well, we live in an authoritarian country. And that's how authoritarian countries are. You know, I think there's a uniform, I don't know anything about Matt Gaetz or what he does. Just to be clear. But I don't think he was as much of a Christian as probably he claims. But I don't know, you know, that's what happens in authoritarian countries. So you're asking a general question. Why does the entire Chinese Communist Party vote in the same way? You know, probably there are different explanations in different places, but we've got, it's a pretty authoritarian situation where one political party always votes unanimously. So I don't know the way I take your question is not a particular question about Trump, but a general question about how authoritarianism works.
But this seemed to have happened fast. I mean, it wasn't long ago that Republicans would criticize other Republicans, and that's just not happening now.
Yeah, we don't have, the Republican Party doesn't have conservatives in it anymore. It just has Trump loyalists or fascists, but like there are people behaving. I mean, it just has Trump loyalists. So it's just composed, it's just an authoritarian party. The 2020 Republican platform was just whatever Trump wants. So there's no independent principles. It just literally is, you know, a Republican is a Trump loyalist who thinks that the 2020 election was stolen. So, you know, that's what the Republican Party now is. It's not a political party where people disagree or like it used to be. You know, a democracy needs principled conservatives. A democracy needs social conservatives, you know, like it needs progressives. But that's not the situation we're in. We have an authoritarian party. So maybe it's like the people who join the Republican Party or in the Republican Party are like, okay, this is what we are. We are Donald Trump.
You mentioned that we're at war, okay? My question is, who are we with war at? Is it just the administration? Is it the power brokers that support the administration? Or is it also the people who voted for him?
30 to 40% of every country is kind of authoritarian or fascist, who's going to vote for. You know, democracy always seems weak. So I wouldn't, you know, I don't think you're going to win over some of those 30% or 35%. I don't think it's possible, and you can't really speak to them, and one shouldn't, you know, I wouldn't get into a fight with them because they probably have more guns. But, you know, and also whatever, I mean, people are authoritarian. They, you know, authoritarianism is very popular. So, but what I'm talking about is the people devising the strategies, the people who are telling the universities, oh, do this, and then you'll get your money. Those people just want to destroy those institutions. So I guess the answer is the regime, the people in the regime.
So then,
and the Heritage Institute, the think tanks behind the Russell Vought is at war with you.
okay, so then why wouldn't we want to speak to that 10% and try to persuade them?
Of course. But I don't think, I think, you know, I don't think there's much. I'm really worried that we're not in a situation where voting is going to matter much. I think everybody should vote, but, you know, what the Supreme Court is now doing, seems to be doing, is shifting to avoid any confrontation with with the president and vice president who said they're not going to listen to the courts. So the Supreme Court, in order to survive, seems to be saying, okay, take anyone you want to them to the concentration camp in El Salvador, do whatever you want, and then we'll still say we're the Supreme Court, Sorry, that was a mocking gesture. So I'm not sure how much, everyone should vote, but I'm not sure how much Trump will listen. He wants to die in office. So I think I think there's a whole bunch of people who, even after the election, between the election and the inauguration, I had this moment, and actually I had the Toronto offer, and at first I thought I was going to take it, and then I decided not to take it. I turned it down, like January 19th or 18th, I turned it right before the inauguration, because I was like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about how bad it's going to be. So I think a lot of people just didn't believe it. And so, because face it, every administration has disappointed us. The financial crisis happened, and Obama, who's supposed to be a socialist, came and gave the bankers trillions and trillions of dollars. And that was supposed to be socialism. So everyone is disappointed. We've had disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. And so, there's a temptation to think, won't this just be another disappointment? But it's much worse than that, and I think there's a pretty sizable group of people who will realize that. But will it matter is the question.
Thank you. And the last person in line probably will be our last question, so please come through. Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you would be able to comment, this is very specific, on what happened with Haile Dugati and the law professor, and look at that in terms of your decision to go to Toronto, and also look at it in terms of the role of, let's say, AI and doxing and so on, in terms of the framework that you're proposing in terms of us understanding these machinations.
Yeah, so let's take another case let's take what happened to Claudine Gay, the Harvard president. What they did is they used AI to search massive overlaps of text. Now, no one ever accused Claudine Gay of stealing any ideas. They accused her of stealing essentially descriptions of experimental setup. The concept of plagiarism was not designed for that. The concept of plagiarism is about stealing ideas. But now that you have AI, you can see whether people copied the experimental setup. 20 subjects were in or X subjects were in a room, and or whatever the sentences were. But no one ever accused Claudine Gay of stealing ideas or stealing results. It was just this tool that plagiarism wasn't designed to deal with. So that's an example of the technology that sort of stretches our concepts. It's not stealing intellectual ideas. It's, but, sometimes scientists get lazy and are like, okay, this is just boilerplate. Why don't I take the boilerplate? But then the boilerplate, then suddenly, so the technology is going to be, they did it to Kevin Cruz at Princeton. So what one has to do is recognize, one thing one has to do is recognize that the technology fits uncomfortably with the concepts. They're going to use anything to go after people. So I think we have to be a lot more, there's kind of a they're going to call anything material support for terrorism. These are concepts: material support for terrorism, plagiarism. Now they can track lots of things, and then they can say, okay, you met someone at a coffee shop, you said something good about this person contributed $2 to that thing they contributed $2 to had a person in it who, so they can trace that because they have infinite, and so they can basically accuse anyone of anything. So what that means is kind of, you just have to they can accuse there's an interview with Christopher Rufo in Politico where he's among many other things he's done, he took down Claudine Gay. And he said, well, crucial to the strategy was enlisting the centrist liberals, like emailing them and like, don't you think this is plagiarism? And getting them on board. So we have to realize that we live in this unique time when everyone has some path, and the concepts are going to be stretched. I mean, that's familiar. It's familiar to call anyone you don't like a terrorist or supporting terrorism. That's one of my friends from Lebanon was saying, well, the nice thing about Lebanon is you can go through the TV dial, and on this channel, they're freedom fighters. On that channel, they're terrorists. Yeah, that's not answering your question, but it's speaking to it.
Good, thank you.
Hi. I'm the mother of a special needs daughter. She's 33 and she's in a group home, intellectual capacity, about 18 months. She eats ground moist food, otherwise she'd choke. I'm really concerned because I know certainly in Nazi Germany, people like this were experimented on. Also, Medicaid is what's supporting her, and that's being destroyed. For people who don't have much means, how do I escape the country with my daughter in tow? What do I do? And how do I save her? And I'm sure other people have, parents on Medicaid in nursing homes and things like that. Like, what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, if I knew what to do, it's just, I do think that we face, I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do is that we're here together tonight, inquiring as to what do we do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, we're going to need to lean on community when the state fails. Now, that is something that we're facing an attack on the state because, the Christian nationalists are getting together with the libertarians because libertarians don't want taxes, and the Christian nationalists don't want there to be a state. They want everyone to rely on their families. But those of us who are not in support of that project, who do think we should rely on the state, we are going to have to rely on our families and communities. And we're going to have our community ties stronger. We're going to have places like this of Unitarians have always provided a place of mutual support that was not tied to a demand for any particular ideology of worship. So,
yeah, because when I looked into trying to, say, immigrate to Canada a few elections ago, I was already too old, Yeah. And that doesn't even take into account like the special needs child. Anyway, thank you.
Canada is not, I hate to say it, a super safe place. The same things are happening in Canada that are happening here. And the one good thing is that Trump's attack on Canada has yet again reinvigorated the good parts of Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to need to go a little quicker now, but we do want everyone to ask their questions.
Okay, I'll be as fast as I can. First, a very quick comment from Paul Krugman, who described the
Trump administration, in a phrase that captures it perfectly, I think, malignant stupidity. Anyway, my question is this. I think your description of racism and the role it's played is crucial, but an important way it occurs, I think, is with words that they put up there as demons, like DEI, Marxist, and so on. How many people who hate DEI and woke and Marxist can tell you what those terms mean, even though they know they're awful evil? But I don't think they know what they mean. Anyway, so my question is, how do we counter that? They have been so effective in making those terms, you're a Marxist, you're evil.
Right.
You're DEI, oh, come on.
Right. So there's the scholar Moira Weigel calls it hate reading. Like the purpose, this is a familiar, I have a Guardian piece called something like the New Republican Southern Strategy. DEI is doing the work that welfare did, but more effectively. So Martin Gilens, the Princeton political scientist, has a 1996 book called Why Americans Hate Welfare. Now, we have, this data has been unlike 90% of social psychology, this data has been replicated again and again. Last time I checked, 2018. Around 51% of Americans, well, here's the first thing to know. In Gilens, he finds that like 60 to 70% of Americans, I don't remember exactly the percentage, think the government should do more to help struggling single mothers. But 60 to 70% of Americans think the government should pay less for welfare. So time and again, we have found that around 50, there's a 2010 study that 50%, 51% of white Americans agree with racist claims like black people are lazier than white people. Among that group, if you call a program welfare, you make it much less popular. So that group, if you call a program welfare, it decreases the positive sentiments of that group by around 30%. So that's a huge political effect among 50% of the population, of the white population. So the term welfare, which is not really a word describing a particular program, was then used to describe any program that the Republicans didn't like, or the Democrats, or Clinton. Clinton did the same thing, ending welfare as we know it. He ran a racist campaign. So it was used to just, if you didn't like a program, you called it welfare. And there was a number of very creative uses of this in the first Trump administration. Like they wanted to have a council on public assistance for all programs like SNAP and stuff, and public assistance has the same race-coded thing. So you code a word with race, and then you label a program that, and then you make it, and then people are against it and want it defunded. Now the thing is, everyone has a DEI office now. So if you can say that DEI is an ideology and it's linked to black people getting power, getting an equal shake, then people will be against it. So you can call everything DEI. And so you can basically get Americans to look the other way as you're destroying it.
Yeah, understood. My question,
yeah. How do we fight that? How do we fight that?
How do we fight it?
Right. Every question from now on will be, how do we fight it? But my main expertise is the analysis. I think your next speaker should definitely be the how do we fight it person.
So, hello. We are actually a brother and a sister in a very odd way. Bachelor of Psychology, 69, the State University of New York at Stony Brook.
Oh, wow.
PhD in Social Psychology, taught by two European intellectual Marxists, which was very unusual. In 1978, and I taught in the State University for 43 years.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
And loved it.
Yeah.
The low end, I might add.
I'm about to go teach in a state university.
Yes, and and it's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, I used to teach at
It's its
Rutgers.
own thing, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm here because I moved to Connecticut 3.5 years ago to be near my children who live in Easton, and I moved into this 55 and over community, and very shortly, as a function, I think probably of my intellectual training, my mechanism to sort of feel fascism, I noticed that the people running the scene are literally small-time fascists. With an enormous control over the way the governance looks. And that's upsetting in and of itself. They've destroyed the financial security of the place, whether people realize it or not. But what really upsets me the most about it, I'm not sure what to do about it, is that there are very progressive people in that community, and they're active outside of that community. But inside, it becomes much more difficult to navigate because people want to be liked, or they want to be accepted, or they don't. I don't have that need. I really don't. 23 years in the state university, I don't have that need. I have the need, I want to be liked, I don't want to be hated, but I don't have the need not to really see and to speak truth to what I really see. And it becomes very difficult under fascism and at the local level. And I'm wondering how many people have noticed any shift at all in what's going on locally around the bravado that can happen when you have this at the state level.
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, there's an old tradition, both in democratic, I start out my propaganda, ideology, and democracy class with Jane Addams's piece, A Modern Lear, and Du Bois's Of the Ruling of Men, and Hitler's speech to the industrialists, and because they're all in 1934 in Dusseldorf, because they're all making the same point. Hitler makes it clearly, you can't have a democratic workplace and you can't have a democratic society and rule workplaces like fascists. He's like, you all rule your workplaces like a dictatorship. You're the boss, and the employees have to do what you say. If you have democracy outside, then your workers are going to rebel. And so you need fascism outside. You need a dictator outside so you can be a dictator inside. And then Du Bois and Jane Addams make that point from the opposite direction. They say, you have to democratize the workplace. So A Modern Lear is about Pullman, George Pullman, who reacts harshly to his workers because they're not grateful for what he's given them, and sort of bashes their heads in. And she says a democracy is not a benevolent dictatorship, even if it's a benevolent dictatorship. The workers are your equals. So workplace democracy and democracy outside the workplace go together, and you're not going to get a democratic society with little authoritarian outlets.
Yeah. One point, University of Toronto is the model for all of the state university faculty senates.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay, we're in the lightning round.
Lightning round.
All right, so why don't everybody ask a question, and I'll try to...
Thank you for coming. I'm saying here I was going to ask you a question about what do we do, but I'm going to change it to what do we think? What do you think? So I feel like I'm a fairly educated, well-read person, but I'm deferring to you, of course, because as a Gen Xer, I don't recall Schoolhouse Rock dealing with any of this. What's been happening lately is all the protests and also the boycotts of places like Tesla, which are making the laminated face guy cry, and also Target and Walmart are going to get in trouble. They're in trouble already, but Trump making Chinese imports 104% tariffs is going to make it worse. What do you think of these things? Are they even worth doing? Or
Yes, absolutely, definitely.
So what would be the best? What would be the best way to continue?
Look,
we're only 3 months in.
Look, you can't, we're in a war, and so if you can easily surrender, and even if you do things, you can still lose, but you still have to do them or else you already lost.
Because I heard you say, do your job.
What?
I heard you say earlier, do your job. And
yes.
I'm a preschool photographer, so I'm not going to be talking to them about the, the wonders of,
democracy and all that. So doing my job doesn't.
Teachers unions support. You are representing perspectives, and some of those perspectives people are trying to erase. So try to represent perspectives that are part of any democratic education.
So the answer seems to be keep boycotting these companies and keep on protesting every time you can make one.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And bear in mind, you might still lose. But if you don't, right. But bear in mind, if you don't do it, then you've already lost.
This was exactly what I was going to ask you about. And so, since I've been standing here for a while, I decided to ask it anyway. But
I'm the same way.
Last Saturday, a few days ago, over 5 million people on the same day got out of their homes and came to places in every state of the union. Many of these people are sitting here right now, who
Thank you.
Out.
Yeah.
And it just seemed to me, I was going to ask the question, you've already answered it, but I wanted to put in that something about what happened on Saturday, I think, was able to happen because it wasn't one point. It wasn't just Musk or Tesla or Medicare or Medicaid or science, or it was everything.
Yeah, everything's
and so
that.
Everyone is in the same tent. And so the question I was going to ask is, do you think that if we keep going with this, getting it all together against the whole thing would be the Trump agenda for fascism? You do think we should keep going on with it, and we will.
You have to.
So thank you.
And bear in mind that history is watching. And so if you don't do anything, history sees that too. And I've lived in countries, I lived in Germany in my teen years. And, there were a lot of people, the grandparents of my friends did nothing. And so there was a very awkward, Germans love their grandparents, but many of my friends were in this tortured relationship where, it was awkward. So, be a good grandparent and protest.
Hi.
Not you, you're not a grandparent.
I hope to be. So obviously it's hard to have movement in your occupation in academia because jobs are so hard to come by. Do you have any concern or fear about a sort of brain drain from American universities to universities where they're better resourced? They don't have this false messaging by the media. Is that of any concern?
Everyone was at Yale was like, how could you leave Yale? How could you? And I'm taking a big pay cut and stuff, and I'm definitely not going for more resources. Don't feel badly for me. I'm still, Yale is great to its faculty, and but I'm definitely taking a big pay cut, and I'm not going for better conditions in any way, or I'm just going to get out of the States and take my kids out of the States. But it's almost impossible. So everyone was like, how could you leave Yale? People were making fun of me. And some rightly, my 9-year-old was like, who's Angela Davis? And one of my colleagues was like, oh, you didn't hear her? You haven't heard of her? The revolutionary who fled to the University of Western Ontario? So, okay, fine. But yeah, it's almost impossible to move. Yeah. But after I accepted the position, I will say a good percentage of the same people who told me they would never leave. How could you leave Yale for the, said, give me a job. But there's a certain percentage of Yale faculty, these Ivy League faculty, this is the greatest thing they'll ever be as a Yale professor, and that means so much to them. But still, so they're never going to leave. But you have to ask whether there will be a Yale University or a Columbia University. There might be some buildings and a name, but the university is a democratic institution, and if you yield that, it's no longer a university, even though it might have that name. So I think, a lot of people who, especially international faculty, like our universities pay so much better and have so much better conditions than any other university system, that maybe Switzerland or something, but almost all university systems in Europe, or all of them. And so people, if they're leaving, it's a strong statement. It means you're going for more teaching, more administration, less pay. But I still think, if you're at one of these elite American universities, not if you're at, most universities do not pay like Yale, Princeton, or Harvard at all. It's almost impossible to get a job as an academic. There's like 800 people for each position. But I would say all international faculty will want to leave. And then a good percentage of non-international faculty who can leave. But a number of people will just be like, especially at our most elite universities, I'll just take the money and be quiet. But it's hard, it's almost a silly question. You started out by knowing that, because who can leave? I mean, who can get it? Like when DeSantis cracked down on Florida universities, you can't criticize DeSantis. One of the things the Florida AAUP report says is you can't criticize DeSantis because they say it's state-sponsored university, so you can't criticize your employer. But people are like, aren't professors leaving? Well, if you teach at Florida State, it's going to be tough to leave.
Yeah. Well, a general round of applause.
Thank you.
We thank you for being here. We thank you for your interest, your curiosity, and most of all, for your willingness to invest your time. Your forebears did so as well. Jason will be here to sign some books. We're going to go right through that door. It takes a while to sign 60 books, so we're going to get you going. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you.